Hi everyone, my name is Alexis and I'm a New York-based developer. In this video, we'll go over the steps necessary to install a text editor called Visual Studio Code. This is also sometimes called VS Code. By the end of the video, you'll be able to create a folder in Visual Studio Code that contains an HTML document that you can open in your web browser. The purpose of this video is to introduce you to Visual Studio Code and how to use it. By the end of this video, you should know how to install Visual Studio Code, customize it with basic settings, and use it to view a project folder and write code. If you're watching this video, this means that you're taking one of the first steps to set up your local development environment, or develop websites and application on your computer and not on the Codecademy website. So a text editor like VS Code is one of the most important tools that we'll need to develop locally. So let's take a moment to talk about what text editors actually are and do. Text editors are also called code editors, and they're applications that are used by developers to write code. They can highlight and format your code so that it's easier to read and understand. It's a lot better than using something like Microsoft Word that wouldn't highlight your code. So you might not realize it, but you've already been using a text editor, and that text editor is on the Codecademy website. It's that area where you write your code in. So text editors have a number of advantages for us as web developers that make us want to use those code editors or text editors instead of something like a Word document or a notepad. For developers, there's a lot of very specific advantages that text editors have. So language-specific syntax highlighting, meaning that parts of our code are going to be highlighted in different colors. Automatic code indentation, so the code will be indented a certain number of spaces or tabs. Color schemes that suit our preferences and can optimize the code readability, plugins or add-on programs that catch errors in the code that we write, and a tree view or visual representation of the project folder and files so that you can conveniently navigate where you are. And lastly, key shortcuts or combinations so that you can press a certain number of keys and open different features of the code editor. Now, you may have also heard or read about IDEs or integrated development editors. And an IDE is a software application that typically allows you to debug, compile, and edit your code without ever having to open additional applications or leaving the editor there. So it's not just about writing code, it also does things to run your code, debug your code, etc. So while the text editor we recommend, VS Code, isn't considered an IDE, it has many IDE-like features that make life as a developer easier without needing a lot of resources like memory that an IDE usually requires. So it's sort of like the best of both worlds. So there's a number of text editors we can choose from. For example, Visual Studio Code is one of the most popular text editors used by developers. That's Visual Studio Code and not Visual Studio, which is slightly different in an IDE. We want the former, the one with code in the name. Other popular text editors you might have heard of are Atom and Sublime Text. Any of these text editors that I've just mentioned would be great for development, but to make things easier, we suggest you start off with Visual Studio Code. Some of the benefits of this particular editor are that it's free to use, it's open source, so that means a program's code can be viewed, modified, or shared, IDE-like features without being an IDE itself, and it's supported by a large community of users in Microsoft, so we can expect regular updates and that it won't be going anywhere since it has so much support. When you're further along in your coding career, you can try other code editors or tools to see what features work best with your personal development workflow. So we've chosen our text editor, now we just need to install it on our computer. In the next part of this video, we'll show you the steps to install VS Code on macOS, Windows, and Linux. The steps are fairly similar, though program names and commands might be slightly different between operating systems. Let's get started. In this section, I'll show you how to download and install Visual Studio Code onto your computer. We're only going to focus here on Windows, Linux, Debian, and Ubuntu, and Windows. This is because those are the most popular operating systems. If you're using a different operating system or Linux distribution, I'd suggest going to the Visual Studio Code website. There's lots of other instructions for other operating systems there. First, visit the Visual Studio Code website and download the latest version of Visual Studio Code. The operating system for your computer should be displayed automatically, but if it's not, click on the down arrow and find it. Then choose to download the stable version for your OS. Otherwise, if everything else looks correct, click on the green download button. So the type of file you download is going to be different depending on what operating system you have. So for Mac users, you're going to download a zip file. For Windows users, you'll download an executable file. That's a file that ends in .exe. Linux users, the website allows you to download 2 different file types. Go with the deb file so that auto updates work. If you get a file warning here, choose Keep the File. Once we're finished downloading that file, we can install VS Code. So now we need to find the Visual Studio Code file in your file manager or the program that lets you see the files and folders on your computer. And this is going to be different depending on your operating system. So I'll show you here on a Mac first. We need to extract the files from the zip file, so just open it up or double click on it. Now, specific to Mac users, you're going to have to click and drag the Visual Studio Code icon into your Applications folder. So for Windows users, you want to find the executable file that you downloaded, run it, and you might get a pop-up here from User Account Control asking if you want to allow this program to make changes to your computer. You want to answer yes. And just keep clicking Next until you're finished installing. And then finally hit Finish. On a successful installation, you'll see that Windows automatically opens up Visual Studio Code. If we go into the Start menu here, you'll see Visual Studio Code has been added to our programs that we have or applications installed, and then we can just pin it to the Start menu. So for Linux users, you can either use the graphical user interface of the Software Program Center to finish installation. You want to find that application that you downloaded and just let it run by double-clicking on it, or you can run 2 commands in the command line to finish installation. And now if we look at what applications we have installed, scroll down, and we see that Visual Studio Code is now installed. We now have VS Code successfully installed on our computer, and we can get started working on projects and coding. Before we wrap up, I want to show you how to use extensions, which are plugins for your text editor, and it can help extend the abilities of VS Code. So you'll find the extensions icon here on the left side of VS Code, and you can search for extensions by name or function. So the extension that I'm searching for here is a different color theme. I want to change the appearance of VS Code. So I just hit install, and then I can hit reload, and that will reload my text editor, and that adds the new color theme, and I can disable the old one. However, disabling the old theme isn't enough to change the appearance. We also need to go down into the settings below and choose the new color theme. So I'll go to the gear icon, I'll choose color theme, and then I'll look for the new color theme that I added, which was New Moon Dracula. Once I do that, the appearance of the code looks different. Now, you won't have to do this for every extension, you only have to do this for the color theme specifically, but finding and installing an extension and then reloading should be the same for all extensions. The last thing I want to show you here is autosave. If you look closely, it says unsaved here, and that's VS Code's helpful way of letting us know, hey, if something happens, you might not be able to recover your work. So we should really turn autosave on so we don't lose any of our work. And the way we do that is we go to the File menu and we choose autosave, and it's as simple as that. However, I just want to mention, if you know a version control system like Git, always use autosave on in tandem with the version control system. If you want to further customize your text editor, take a look at some of these other features of Visual Studio Code. Alright, let's wrap up. So installing and using a text editor is part of setting up your local development environment. This is sort of like your first independent step as a developer, so if you're at this point where you're ready to code on your own computer and on the Code Academy website, you should be really proud of yourself for being able to set this up and getting started on some independent projects. So some things to take away: text editors are different than IDEs. They have different purposes and functions, although through the use of things like extensions, we can make text editors a lot more IDE-like. Using a text editor to write code also has certain advantages that help us write better code. I mentioned some of these earlier, things like highlighting or syntax highlighting, linters, which help us check code for errors, etc. And lastly, one of the other advantages that I mentioned about text editors is that they're highly customizable, and we can customize them to our preferences. And I showed you that by showing you how to search for extensions and changing the color theme. Okay, so that's all I've got on the topic of installing and setting up VS Code. My name is Alexis from Code Academy. Happy coding!